Hi guys, my name is Sandy Giff. I'm a licensed realtor here in the Central Florida area, also a licensed lender. And as everyone knows, there's a huge disturbance in the real estate industry. So today we're going to talk about how to work with a real estate agent with the new law that's been passed that goes into effect August 17, 2024. A week before I'm doing the video. So NAR, which is the National Association of Realtors, they were in a lawsuit with a lot of homeowners who thought, or they say, that they were ripped off by their real estate agents and real estate brokerage by not disclosing the correct commission. And it went into the Department of Justice, and it was a whole thing for years and years and years. And now I'm going to give it a shortcut of it. Now they're at the settlement. And now the settlement is saying each realtor must disclose to their buyer who they're working with, to the buyer and the seller, who they're working with. Am I working in your interest, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, or am I working in your interest, Mr. or Mrs. Seller? Which interest are we working in? And each buyer now must sign a buyer's agreement that stipulates how that agent will be working for them. So that buyer's agreement is going to look something like, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, I'm going to help you find a home. When I do find your home, here's my fee, and the fee must be stated up front. And the seller is not obligated to pay this fee as per the new law. Now, what does that mean? Typically, back in the day, back in regular real estate before August 17, 2024, so today, what typically happens is an agent would get a listing to sell someone's home. And the owner might agree, hey, I'm paying you X amount of commission. And that agent would decide, okay, you're going to pay me X, so I'm going to split that. And if another real estate agent bring me a buyer, then I'm going to give that buyer's agent or that real estate agent that brought me the buyer off of my commission or some of my commission, right? So let's say they say I'm paying 10, let's say the agent is saying I'm going to sell your home and I'm going to charge you 10%. And that agent might say, okay, I'm going to sell your home, charge you 10%. If another realtor come and bring me a buyer, I'm going to pay 4% off the 10% you're paying me. Right now they're saying that's not how we're going to operate anymore. So the way it's going to operate is, if we talk with a buyer, for an example, we have to sign a buyer's agreement before anyone shows your home after August 17. You must sign a buyer's agreement. In that buyer's agreement, it will stipulate the compensation. So let's say it's 10%. You talk to your realtor and they're like, okay, I'm going to work with you. And in working with you, I'm going to charge you 10% if I find you a home. Now, when they find you that home, that seller is not obligated to pay that 10%. But you're still going to have to pay to this realtor because you signed a contract with them. So you want to make sure that when you're signing these buyer's agreement that you're okay with the compensation and all the other information that's in the contract that you're going to have to sign with that realtor to find you a home. When you're selling a home, that was always the norm. A seller always had to sign, a homeowner or a seller always had to sign a contract with the realtor, and they already know, okay, when you sell my home, I'm paying you this amount of money at the closing table, right? So if you're working with a seller, they're going to still do the same thing, but now the seller might be saying, well, wait a minute now, since NAR is saying, or the new rule is, I don't necessarily have to pay the buyer's agent, which they never were, if you ask me. The agent that was representing the seller was really just splitting their commission. But let's say the seller is like, well, since there's a new rule now, I am only paying you 4% to sell my home. Let the buyer, if another agent bring me a buyer, let that agent deal with their buyer and figure it out, right? So what do you think is going to happen? A lot of things is going to happen, right? For an example, agents who are used to getting the money being split from the listing agent, and the listing agent would be the person that lists the property, they're not going to want to show any home that doesn't offer any compensation. Now, how are they going to know there's any compensation? They're going to have to call the agent. So they're going to have to call the agent and say, hey, I have a buyer interested in 1 Main Street. Is your seller paying any compensation to the buyer's agent? The agent might say yes or no. So if I was a homeowner and I was selling my home, I would still want to offer some kind of compensation, because that way you'll get more people looking at your property. That's one thing. On the buyer side of things, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking to buy a home and I'm going to have to sign a buyer's agreement now, because this is where the real change is on the buyer side. And we've been doing this for forever. We've always had our buyers sign a buyer's agreement. We've always had the compensation in the buyer's agreement, so the buyer knows what's going to happen. And if the agent where we're buying the house from isn't willing to pay that compensation, the buyer is going to have to pay the difference. So if you sign a buyer's agreement and your agent went with an agent and the agent went out and they found you a home, you're obligated to pay that, whatever that amount of money is in that buyer's agreement. One of the things you could do is you could try to work it into your closing costs. So you could say, hey, your agent could tell the listing agent, hey, I have a buyer, they're offering $350,000. Off this, they want $10,000 back to add towards your closing costs, as an example. And then you could use that $10,000 for your closing costs and also to pay the agent based upon what fee the agent is charging you. The agent could charge any figure. So that's how it's going to kind of work right now. So if you're a buyer, because it's going to affect buyers more than it will sellers. If you're a buyer and you're looking for a home, either you're going to have to deal with the listing agent directly, and you don't want to do that because, guys, remember that the listing agent is representing who? They're representing the seller. They list the seller's home. Where would they work against the interest of the seller when the seller is paying them? So it is a very good idea for you to get your own agent. If you get your own agent, you will need to sign a buyer's agreement. The buyer's agreement is going to list what that compensation is. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Make sure whatever fee they're charging you, you could either pay it yourself, or you could work it in your closing costs to get it paid, or something to that effect. Or you might tell the agent, you know what? I know this is a fee you're charging me, but the only way I'm going to be able to pay you is you're going to have to go negotiate at as part of the deal. Guys, real estate comes down to negotiation. It's all about negotiation. There's no hard and fast rules to anything. So the buyer can pay the agent any amount of money. The seller can pay the agent any amount of money. So there's no fixed rate or anything fixed. In the general practice of things, it would appear or it seem like there's a general rule, but there really is not. Because a seller can pay any amount of money to an agent could require any amount of money to the seller, and the same thing on the buyer side. So I'm going to do 2 separate videos on buyers and sellers because it becomes very confusing. But remember, beginning August 17th, for you to look at a home, if you're using a realtor, the realtor must sign a buyer's agreement with you, and it must stipulate how much they're charging you should you decide to buy the home. If you decide you don't want to do a buyer's agent and you want to just go directly with the seller or the seller's agent, do remember that the seller's agent is always going to be in favor of the seller, not you. So you got to decide, do I want to save some money and just work with the listing agent and just buy this home, or do I want to have a buyer's agent? You know, that's completely up to you, and every jurisdiction is going to be different. So you got to figure out, like for instance, in Florida, our main transaction is a transaction agent, right? We're mostly transaction agent unless we sign an exclusive agreement with a buyer or with a seller. And even when we sign the contract with a buyer or seller, we're still a transaction agent unless we specifically become a single agent. So those are a lot of things that you need to know as a general consumer. So when you start to talk to a realtor beginning August 17th or after, you need to find out what role they're going to be playing. If you want to look at a home, you need a buyer's agreement. Sellers already know they have to sign a contract in order for that agent to sell their home. But once again, what we do is we find off-market properties. So we find properties for our buyers that's not even on the internet, so we don't have this kind of issue. So when we find off-market property, we're going to the seller saying, hey, if you're thinking of selling your home, we have a buyer looking to buy. So I might say yes, and then I'll tell the seller, hey, in order for this to happen, this is our fee that's going to be paid by the seller. So if you're looking for off-market property, it's an easier way to go. However, do remember that now as a buyer, because it's going to be new to a lot of buyers, and they're going to be like, well, I just want to see the home. Why I got to sign a contract just to look at a house? I don't know if I'm going to buy it. This is the rule now, guys. Whether you're going to buy it or buy it not, you're going to have to sign a buyer's agreement beginning August 17th. If you have any questions or anything to do with this, feel free to give us a call, send us a text, 407-791-4713. Again, my name is Sandy. I'm a licensed realtor here in Central Florida, and we have a new rule coming into play August 17, 2024. See you on the next video.